Today, routine cavalry calls and fanfares for ceremonial occasions are the only times when we use the natural trumpet. By natural, I mean an instrument without finger holes or keys. But this was the type of instrument in use for nearly 250 years, from the 16th century until the early 19th century, when the valve trumpet was invented. The history of the trumpet goes back over thousands of years, originally a straight instrument, as you can see from this ancient Egyptian trumpeter, and this Assyrian one. And in 400 BC, at the Olympic Games, there was a trumpet playing competition. There are many references in the Bible, and from Roman reliefs we know of their early use on ceremonial and processional occasions. Straight trumpets like these can be found to this day. There's the so-called bark trumpet of the late 19th century, often known as the Aida trumpet, and the post horn of coaching days. As on all natural brass instruments, only a limited number of notes can be sounded, what in fact is known as the harmonic series. The development of the trumpet is the story of how the gaps at the lower end of that harmonic series were filled in, and how eventually it became completely chromatic. This was the shape until the end of the 14th or early 15th centuries, when, as you can see, it really had become unwieldy. Attempts were made to bend it, first into a fairly wide zigzag, then a narrower one. It was next looped and finally bent into the shape it has retained to this day. A mouthpiece, two bends in a length of narrow-bore cylindrical tubing, widening out at about 3/4 of its length into a moderate-sized bell. Although the number of notes on this instrument is limited, they are quite adequate for a simple tune like this. Now the trouble with this natural trumpet is that it can only play in one key, a key dictated by its length of tubing. As it was becoming a very popular instrument, something had to be done about this. Something was. The mouthpiece was made detachable, and different lengths of tubing were inserted here. The instrument is now longer, giving a lower harmonic series. With some spare loops, or crooks as they were called, the trumpeter could now play in several different keys, but that didn't solve the problem of playing any but the simplest of melodies. The notes at the lower end of this instrument are so far apart that he can only play simple arpeggios or fanfares. As you go higher, the notes are closer together, so that it's possible to play a tune like Three Blind Mice. But this brings another problem for the brass player, a physical one, the question of the lips, or embouchure as it's called. High notes need a very tight lip, whereas low notes need a looser one. The difficulty of changing rapidly from one to the other is considerable. The spectacular parts that Bach and Handel wrote were only possible because they were divided between three players. the principale for the lowest notes and loose lips, clarino 2 for slightly tighter lips, and clarino 1 for very tight lips. The technical advantages of modern trumpets, of course, make it possible, but still difficult, for all three parts to be played by one player. I use this D trumpet, a slightly shorter model than the normal B flat, for the famous trumpet obbligato in Handel's Messiah. The trumpet shall sound. But for the famous high-lying trumpet part in Bach's Brandenburg Concerto No. 2, I need a much smaller trumpet, the piccolo B flat. There's a tremendous feeling of history in this little Thameside village of Bisham, where we're recording. It was from somewhere about here that Henry VIII first saw, on the other side of the river, Jane Seymour, later to become his queen. He might even have written this galliard when staying at Bisham Abbey. Like Bach and Handel, most of the composers of the Baroque period were organists, so much of their music must have first been heard in church. That was an air by the German composer Telemann, organist at Leipzig and Hamburg. And now an allegro by Purcell. Henry Purcell, assistant keeper, maker, mender, repairer and tuner of the regals, organs, virginals, flutes, recorders and other wind instruments in Westminster Abbey. And finally, of course, organist there. Brilliant as the trumpet of this period must have sounded, it still had its severe melodic limitations. Various methods were tried to eliminate these. Experiments were made with instruments on the trombone principle, which resulted in the slide trumpet. This was fairly successful, but only popular in England. By extending this slide, the tube is lengthened enough to lower the harmonic series by 2 semitones, thus giving the instrument considerably more notes. The slide, in effect, is 2 built-in crooks. Here was an effort to shape the trumpet so that the semitones could be got by the hand technique of the horn. But the muffled quality of the extra notes thus gained was much too noticeable. In 1795, Weidinger, a Viennese trumpeter, produced an instrument with side holes covered with keys. This trumpet, with Weidinger's key system, was the type of instrument for which Haydn wrote his famous trumpet concerto. But keys and holes don't suit the cylindrical bore of the trumpet. They distort the tone. Although, oddly enough, on the conical bore of the bugle, they're quite effective. The final development of the trumpet came with the introduction of the valve system in 1815. First, 2 valves only, but this still left some notes missing. And now, today, 3 valves. A trumpet and crooks all in one instrument. These pistons, when depressed, send the air through varying lengths of tubing, making this virtually 7 natural trumpets all in one. I can now play the harmonic series on these 7 notes. The gaps in the series are filled in. The instrument is now completely chromatic. Now hear the Haydn as the composer might have visualized it. The beauty of the trumpet lies in the clarity and brilliance of its tone. This is partly due to the cylindrical bore of the tube. The rounder quality of the horn tone is a result of the conical tube. But both these tones are affected by the shape of their mouthpieces. The shallow cup and sharp-edged throat of the trumpet mouthpiece emphasize the brilliance which comes by nature from a cylindrical tube, whereas the conical cup of the horn mouthpiece, with its wide, well-rounded throat, amplifies the natural smoothness of tone which comes from a conical tube. An instrument which could be called part trumpet, part bugle and part horn is the cornet. Although shaped like a trumpet, it has the conical bore of the horn and a mouthpiece halfway between the two. It's interesting to compare their sounds. Curious to think that this completely chromatic instrument was first introduced into the orchestra in the 1830s, and yet not one composer took advantage of it. They preferred the lyrical qualities of this cornet to the brilliance of the trumpet. Until the beginning of the present century, Beethoven's famous trumpet call from his overture Leonora No. 3 was probably the most important moment in a trumpeter's life. Wagner added a bass trumpet to the brass section of the orchestra, but hardly anything to the trumpet repertoire. And the most the great orchestrator like Rimsky-Korsakov contributed was another fanfare, which could almost have been played on the earliest natural trumpet. Richard Strauss was the first composer to exploit the modern instrument. Composers like Ravel and Stravinsky followed suit, and phrases like this are commonplace today. Luckily, composers today feel free to use the trumpet as they wish, dramatically, extravagantly, or even happily.